Well, the single most important issue, of course, is the economy, as it almost always is. With the exception of 1972, at the height of the Vietnam War, and 2004, the first election after 9/11, the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, the economy is always rated as the #1 priority for Americans, with security and defense and foreign policy together coming in somewhere in second. So the state of the economy and Obama's management of the economy in particular, I think, is going to be the referendum point. And we've already seen from the Republicans, including Mitt Romney, the likely nominee, the critique is that Obama's, he's a nice guy, people like him, but he doesn't know what he's doing and he's not managing the economy well. And I think that will be the #1 issue for discussion in terms of the critique of Obama. And then Obama in turn will be responding, I think, by saying things aren't great, but they're better than when I got here, and we need to stay the course. He's going to be making an argument on the economy very similar to what Bush made on the Iraq War in 2004. I think social issues will jump in periodically. We've seen abortion and contraception and immigration, particularly in the Republican primary. That's a little bit more of an intramural fight, but I think those issues will spill over into the general election. And of course, on the international front, we'll talk a little bit about the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden, the drawdown in Iraq, and rising tensions between Iran. I think the public probably cares a little bit more about the deficit than politicians do. Both parties have shown a very demonstrable ability to raise the deficit by spending without increasing taxes. And there is a certain degree of angst and concern about the rising size of the U.S. Federal debt and the annualized deficits. Obviously, with Rick Santorum's late surge here in the primary, certain conservatives believe that values issues, like choice and abortion and gay marriage, aren't getting enough attention for them. But I think in the end, a lot of those issues will be subsumed to the larger discussion about GDP growth rate, the unemployment figures over the next 6 or 8 months before the election. And if those numbers continue, they're not great, but if they continue to add jobs, the U.S. government of 250,000 jobs a month, I think Obama will probably get reelected. And if those numbers turn in the other direction, he'll have a very hard time come November. Well, there are two. One is how it works, right? I mean, we have this crazy colonial vestige called the Electoral College, where you are actually casting votes to pick people who go to their respective state government, state capitals in December, and it's not a national election in terms of the aggregation of the votes. Everybody in the nation can vote, but they're aggregated state by state, and you have to win each state's electoral votes, which I think a lot of the world learned after the Bush-Gore recount, but still most Americans and many of my students don't understand how the Electoral College works, so we're not expecting foreigners. And then I think the second big misconception with respect to issues is foreigners think that things that are important that are happening in their country or their part of the world will be prominent in U.S. elections, but Americans are very insular, concerned about their own domestic economic issues, and not often worried about what's happening with the European crisis until and unless the economies of Europe are affecting Wall Street. Then it matters, or if something happens in China affects gas prices, then it matters. But insofar as international developments and diplomatic issues, aside from issues of war, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth, and Iran, most Americans are thinking about America first during an election and not about the rest of the world in a way that other countries have to often think about America in their national elections. So there's a bit of an asymmetry there. I think it's going to be a less exciting election, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, 2008 was just one of those elections that, as a political scientist, as a writer and commentator for the Baltimore Sun and freelance writer, I was elbowing and nudging my fellow journalists, saying, can you believe this thing, this titanic fight between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and then Obama, shattering the glass ceiling in terms of a non-white president, first in the country and first in the world in a white majority country. So, this is interesting stuff in 2008. I'm not saying 2012 won't have its share of highlights, but I think it's not going to be the kind of tectonic election that we remember where you were on election night the way that 2008 was. So, if we have a change in the presidency, it'll be significant in terms of policy, and if Obama wins a second term, I think it'll be less interesting in that sense, because the outcome, incumbents usually win. About 2/3 of presidential incumbents from the time of George Washington win. So I think if Obama wins, we'll look back and say this was an okay election, but not one of the great ones. said, I think, the next 2 quarters of GDP growth, April, May, June, July, August, September, as well as, the job numbers that come out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the first Friday of the month, if they continue to be at a rate of GDP growth of somewhere between 2 and 3%, which isn't great, but it's not bad considering where we were after the financial collapse and the Wall Street crisis meltdown and the credit default swap and mortgage-backed security problems of 2007, 2008, not to mention the compounding effect of the housing crisis and the foreclosure crisis. Given where Obama started in his first 4 years, he's going to say, look, it's not great, but it's better than where we were. And if it continues in that sort of trend, I think Obama will be fine and win by some kind of margin similar to what he beat John McCain 4 years ago, maybe a little lower, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7%, when he beat McCain by 6.7. If, on the other hand, things go south and the economy tightens and restricts, and if outside influences like the European economies have a negative effect on U.S. growth and demand and manufacturing gains, then Obama could be in a lot of trouble. And that's holding aside any unforeseen things that I can't predict, like a terrorist attack on U.S. soil or some sort of outbreak in the Middle East with Iran that throws everything out of the equation. But based on what we know, we're going to have an economy for the next 6 months, and if it continues on its path, Obama will probably win a second term like most incumbent presidents do, and if not, he'll join Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush as the only president since the Second War to not get reelected.